Welcome to the Intellectual Freedom Podcast. Here we analyze politics, culture, technology, personal growth and development, and society at large through the lens of critical thinking and open-mindedness, not demagoguery and partisan hyperbole. I'm Dr. David Hopkins, humanities professor, your host and guide. So without further delay, let's get started. Welcome everyone today. Hello, and this is a conversation I'm actually incredibly excited, and I've been looking forward to this one for quite some time. I have Milagros Phillips with us today. She is a keynote speaker, an author, a certified coach, a TEDx presenter, and she's actually known as the race healer, is one of the terms I saw out there for her. And you know, before we even get to Milagros talking, the second someone mentions race or racism anymore, there's almost like a natural tendency to throw up walls instantaneously. Agitation can just show up, and people almost dig in their heels before they even hear a word once the word racism or race is mentioned. So I think it's really important that we talk about this, and bringing on Milagros with such a unique experience and 20 plus years of experience in this field is really important. And because I think one of the things in bringing on Milagros is the ideological left and the right, they've reduced this topic almost to just simple sound bites that they use during election season. And we hear these terms like racist, Nazi, fascist. They're being thrown around so frequently without us really taking a step back and understanding the full context behind it. So I am so pleased you are here, Milagros. And so why don't you just start right now and just tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you, David. I'm really excited for us to have this conversation. I actually was born and pretty much raised in the Dominican Republic. I was 10 years old when I came to the US, and I had just finished the 7th grade. And I had to learn to speak English. Spanish is my first language. Right. And, you know, I mean, it was moving to a different world. I still remember my sister picked me up at JFK when I got off the plane. Back then it was Pan American Airlines. Some people may actually remember that. Yeah, really. That airline. But I remember we first of all, she met me with a fur coat, like. and the first thing that I remember was we got into a yellow taxi cab. Mm-hmm. And as we're driving, this white stuff starts falling on the car. So I look at my sister and I said to her, "What is that?" She said, "Nieve, snow." Yeah. I'd never seen snow because obviously in a tropical country, we do not get snow.
Right.
So, yeah, so, you know, but it's been an interesting journey. Early on in the Dominican Republic, I faced a lot of what we call colorism, because that's what there's a lot of in the Dominican Republic, being a dark-skinned Black woman. And then I came to the US, and it was out and out, not just colorism, but also racism, which is a different form of that. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, it's been an interesting journty. Really interesting journey. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, my wife from Venezuela, I could give some really good snow stories there too. The first time she saw snow, when I was born and raised in Iowa in the middle of the Midwest. And so when she went up there, well, we won't even go there. I could talk about that too long. So, but anyway, so, you know, I saw your TEDx talk, and you did a really interesting take on what you termed, and I believe you actually even coined this term, race literacy. Mm. And so could you kind of discuss and explain that as kind of a starting off point for us as we get going here?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So race literacy for me is the knowledge and awareness of the history of race, how we are all acculturated into a racial caste system, the impact that has on everything in the society, and the way that it affects individuals in their actions, reactions, and interactions. So
Okay.
becoming race literate is having an awareness of all of the above.
Okay. Excellent. And and so as we take this idea, the talking about race, you make a distinction, and I think we all need to, between a term you call anti-racism and healing racism. That's an interesting term there that you use. Can so when we get into the concept of racism, I want to jump into this one quick. What is that difference? Can you kind of explain those two terms for me?
Sure. Anti-racism work has been around for quite a while. And anti-racism work is really looking at the structural racism and how it impacts individuals in all areas of life, whether they are purchasing a home, getting a job, like all the various ways in which racism impacts, particularly Black and Brown people and Indigenous people. And so that anti-racism looks at the impact of structural and systemic racism on individuals. Healing racism is taking what is hurtful, um, what hurts in so many ways around race and racism, and finding a way to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And here is what I mean by that. Healing racism is about looking at, well, let me backtrack. When we go to the doctor because something is wrong, something's hurting, something, whatever it is, right? One of the first things they ask us to do is to write down our history. And the reason you need your history for healing is you need to understand what came before, because what came before is what's affecting you now. And if you don't change what came before, you're going to continue to get sick. Or even if you get better in one place, you'll get sick somewhere else because you still haven't dealt with the underlying causes of the disease.
Right.
Okay. So healing racism is about looking at the underlying causes of racism, not just the institutional and structural, but really looking at the way that it affects human beings in mind, body, spirit, and emotions. And so to do healing work when it comes to racism, we need to, one, understand the history, two, understand trauma and be trauma informed. And three, we need to be able to look at the way that it affects us in our body, mind, spirit, and emotions, and how it affects our actions, reactions, and interactions.
Okay.
Because racism is institutional, systemic, which is what we deal with when it comes to anti-racism. We deal with the top two layers. But racism is institutional, systemic, internalized, and which then becomes personal and interpersonal. And so by that I mean, and we look at all five of those, and we look at the effects of all five of those on the mind, body, spirit, and emotions. So by that I mean, we look at institutional racism. What are the laws? When were they established? How was it established? How does it continue to affect us? Systemic. What are the systems that have been put in place to uphold the laws that were put in place? Okay. Then it becomes internalized, because what happens is we internalize our environment, whether we're aware of it or not. I mean, that's what babies do, and we continue to do that throughout our lives. And so what we're doing is we are internalizing the systems and the structures that we live under. So you can't help but internalize racism, because what's institutional and systemic is already racist. And so we internalize that, and then it becomes part of our personality. And now you're interacting with someone. So it's institutional, systemic, internalized. You've absorbed it, right? Personal, because now it's living inside of you, and interpersonal, because now, because it's living inside of you, you're going to act, react, and interact with other human beings out of what is internalized inside of you. I always tell people racism is not the fault of anyone living today, but it's still our collective responsibility to heal it. And so, so giving people basic background information that can hold that space of healing or making things better, allowing people to have a way of living that while we're still living in the institutional and systemic, people can begin to make their own lives better from the inside out. So that's what healing racism is. So that's the difference. One is from the outside in. So anti-racism is from the outside in. What are the laws? What are the systems? What are the structures that are affecting you? Racism is both from the outside in. What are the laws? What are the systems? What are the structures that are affecting you? And from the inside out, how is that affecting you in your mind, body, spirit, and emotions? And then what are some of the things that you can do to begin to create, to live out of a place of wholeness? Because no matter how much of a broken system we live out of, whether it's a broken family, a broken community, or a broken country, there is something inside of us, each and every one of us as a human being, that is untouched by any of that. And so healing is about reaching into that part of us. And the reason I explained this in my seminar that I just did last week, the reason that people are resilient is because there's something living inside of them that's greater than the resilience that allows them to be resilient, if that makes sense.
Right, right.
And so that's where we reach in to find our wholeness and begin to live out of compassion, love, understanding, and begin to create our own little world that is grounded in compassion, love, and understanding, and then reaching out to the greater world so that more and more people can become loving, compassionate, and understanding. But a lot of that is through the healing process, understanding the history, understanding the structures, and all of those things.
Right, right. I think, those top two layers where you mentioned the systemic and the institutionalized, was that the term?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I from my studies on that, I mean that basically sounds a lot like the critical race theory. Is that where most of that theory is focusing on the power structures? You go back to Marcuse or maybe the Hamburg group way back, that started the quote unquote critical theory that later evolved into critical race. Is that what is when you're talking about the anti-racist? Is that really where that lies? This critical?
No. I think, unfortunately, because most people listen to the news and then they parrot what they hear on the news, that critical race theory is now the buzzword. Okay.
Yes.
And every 2 to 3 weeks or months, there's a new buzzword. Okay. But that's part of the disease. But at any rate, so now it's critical race theory. Critical race theory was created in the 1970s by I don't know why I'm blanking out on her name right now, but she is a law professor. She still teaches at Columbia University. She also teaches at a university in California. Critical race theory.
Yeah, I can't remember her name either.
Yes, I'm blanking out.
But I know who you're talking about. The name's escaping me right now. But
yeah, and so
Davis.
critical race
Angela
theory.
Davis, is that it? Was it Angela?
No.
That was another one. Okay.
No, critical race theory was begun to have law students, specifically law students, have a way of looking at institutionalized racism. So how the laws are steeped in racism and how they impact people of color. It is still a course that is taught, and there are about 230 something law schools in this country. Critical race theory is offered, not demanded, but offered in about 200 of those schools. That is the only place that is actually, because this information is copyrighted, but critical race theory is a way of looking at the laws. It is not it's not what people think about it is it's a theory that we now have to. That's not what it is. It is actually a way of looking at the laws so that young people studying the law can understand how racism is written into the law. Okay. And how the ways that the laws are interpreted because of the way that it's written into the law affect people of color.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, and I'll bring up a point that I think many people struggle with who are not of color when it comes to those top layers. So I think there are many whites who would say, I'm not racist. I voted for Obama. I voted for Vice President Kamala Harris. My goodness, I'm being told that my whole life I've been programmed to be a racist, and I swear I'm not a racist. I'm married to someone of color. I've got family of color. Please don't tell me anymore that I'm systemically racist because I swear I'm not. Well, how do you, like when you hear that, how do we kind of bring the groups together? Because sometimes when you hear that, it makes people who you would want to not be racist to actually repulse them from considering alternative viewpoints like you're talking about. So I think the healing has to come in, because I think whites and blacks or Hispanics or Asians or Jews or whoever it might be, if we don't get past you're racist if you don't think this. If you don't believe me on that, well, then you must be this. We got to get past that. So,
yeah.
How do we move to that? I think you use the term like how do we heal racism? I think that's really the $1 million question at the end of the day. If we can get there, we've solved so much. So,
yeah. Well, the first thing people need to do is get my new book, because it actually gives 13 layers that people go through who are honestly looking to heal from racism. And I cover some of the foundations of racism, which most people don't know. The racism we're experiencing today was institutionalized in the 1400s, and we're still living under those same laws that institutionalized racism in the 1400s. And so, so having an awareness of the law and how the law affects us. We are a nation of laws, right?
Right.
It doesn't necessarily equate to justice, but we are a nation of laws.
Right.
So, so looking at things like the doctrine of discovery, which actually was one of the first written documents that created the racial system we live under today. And then understanding castas, which is the caste system that the Spanish and the Spaniards created. A lot of people don't realize that the US was under Spanish rule before it went to being English ruled through the English colonies. And so, so there's a lot of missing history for people. And so the first thing that people need to do is to learn their history. And one of the thing that I spent the most, I have a 2-day program that I've been facilitating now for 20 years. It's called Race Demystified. And Race Demystified gives people all this background information that we do not learn in school. It gives them the 13 layers of the healing process. It walks them through how we heal and what that's like.
Right.
Because there's even a level of grief that we tackle in there, regardless of the color of people's skin. Because here's the thing, David, racism is a problem for people of color. It is not the problem of people of color. We cannot solve racism. Racism is a white problem. And it was institutionalized that way. It's not good or bad, right or wrong. It is what it is. And if we don't face the reality, we can't solve it. We can't solve an illusion. We can't heal on illusion. We can't heal on a lie. Okay, it is what it is. So, for instance, the doctrine of discovery is something that still continues to affect Indigenous people around the world. And when I say around the world, I'm talking about all the places that have been colonized. That includes the United States, Canada, India, Asian countries, Caribbean countries, South America, Central America, all of these places that were once colonized by Europeans are under, and all these various African countries are under the doctrine of discovery, which is something that was established in the 1450s, for the Portuguese crown. Then it was revised again and again. And the last time it was revised was 1493 when Columbus went back from Quisqueya, the first and original name of La Española, which is now the Dominican Republic. When he went back to Spain with gold, silver, food and human cargo in the form of Taínos, which were the natives that lived on that island. When he went back, the Vatican, which is, by the way, the doctrine of discovery is a papal bull. It was created by the Vatican, and it still lives in the Vatican. So when he went back, they revised it, and when they revised it, all of these, you remember, it was originally for the Portuguese, then it was for the Portuguese and the Spaniards. Then it became something that spread because all of the monarchies were related. So it spread like wildfire. So now you got all these European countries going in and colonizing all of these countries along the equatorial band. And there's a reason that they were colonizing specifically countries along the equatorial band. The doctrine of discovery still affects nations today, to the point that the doctrine of discovery was used in this country was 2005 when Justice Ginsburg used it to win a case against the Oneidas of New York, the Oneida Nation of New York. It was used in 2015. We've cited, I just did a program for a group of lawyers, and we cited 5,000 cases in which the doctrine of discovery was used. It was used in the 1830s for land grab. And the doctrine of discovery not only affects the land, the doctrine of discovery affects the land, the waterways, and the people who were supposed to be perpetually enslaved. And so, without an understanding of why and how whites have internalized racism, one of the things that I tell people is, if whites could just stop looking at the word racism as a character, as a character description, if they could just look at it as conditioning. In other words, people have been conditioned for hundreds of years to separate and segregate individual groups of humans, when in reality, there is no epigenetics that separates us. We're one human family and we're all related, And so if without an understanding of these deeper issues and the context of this stuff, we can't heal from it and we can't solve it.
So, but I think one of the biggest things that I'm big on trying to get tangible, like, so real things that you can dig in and the average person could do, because when you go back to the 1400s or the 1500s, they went everywhere and they enslaved everybody, and they did it because they wanted to take money from anybody at any point in time. This was the age of exploration, and they were going to take and conquer and steal and bring as much back. Were they more interested in the racist part, or were they more interested in getting wealthy beyond human belief? Probably, if I would bet, it's probably more.
It was the wealth. Because think about this, David. Prior to colonization, the Africans and the Europeans had a long-standing history of trade and diplomacy. And there were actually Black royal houses in Europe. Right. And so no, it was all about let's go and get it. And I do this whole presentation in my 2-day that helps people really ground it and really get it. Because without that background, understanding that people in colder climates develop differently from people in warmer climates, simply because of their surroundings, that there are things that are going to be really important to people in cold climates that are just not important or valuable in warm climate. And so once people start to understand all of that, like there are all these little pieces that when people get those pieces, they're like, oh, now I get it. So rather than feeling like someone, and there are people who use the word racism to insult others. Okay. Right. So we're not going to be naive about that.
Right.
But the reality is, if white people could hear that word as, oh, my conditioning is showing. Conditioning is not somebody's fault. Conditioning is something that happens naturally through the stuff that happens in the systems that people live under and they absorb. Okay. So once you start to understand that, then racism isn't, it doesn't have the same charge
Right.
because it isn't something that you use to insult someone. Like I said, some people do use it that way. Okay.
Right.
But
Right.
it's the word that we currently have that actually describes how this stuff was institutionalized and therefore absorbed by people living under those systems. So
Right.
there's a John Bradshaw, who was a therapist, wrote a wonderful book called Family Secrets. And in Family Secrets, what he explains is that yes, there's some things in families that people purposely keep secret. Okay.
Mhm.
And then there are things in family that people just don't talk about. And as a human family, we have both.
Right.
But what he said was people still act out of the secret, even when they don't know what the secret is.
Right.
So
No,
that's what we're dealing with when it comes to race and racism. A lot of decontextualized trauma, a lot of decontextualized historical stuff that we never talk about or we never learn, that has been left out of history books, sometimes purposely, sometimes ignorantly. But we still, as a human body, as a human family, are acting out of the human family secret.
Yeah.
Doctrine of discovery is one of those human family secrets that's just starting to really come out now. And there are native tribes that are trying to get the Vatican to rescind it, but it's still alive today, and it isn't just something from the 1400s. It is still affecting us today because it's international law.
Yeah. But I think the big concern from the white population is probably, when you talk to 14, most people, I can't, for example, even convince my wife to do something. And so when a white today is told you need to change the
Yeah.
system that exists, I mean, studies show now most people don't believe they can impact the government in any way, shape, or form, no matter what color they are. They feel like they're completely alienated most of the time. It's hard to find people anymore today, especially in my college demographic, that believe that anything these politicians ever say that they're going to change something one way or the other. They don't. So when they hear, this started in the 1400s by whites, you're white, you need to change it, it gets overwhelming. I love what you talk about, though, when you say to get to the deeper personal level, because the one thing we all can control is ourself.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where that messaging sometimes gets aggressive towards whites, that you need to change this. And it's like, my goodness, I can barely control my own life, let alone try and fix a company not hiring people of color, or let alone the United States government doing something that is not racially sensitive. Goodness gracious, most people are trying to pay a bill in a month. And I think your piece of it that is so vital is that, because if it's almost like the Confucius model of it all starts in your own home. It all starts with your own house. Because if you can fix your own house, then you can fix your community, your family. You fix your family, you fix community, can fix state, and state, and so on and so forth. I think that's the important piece. But I think what gets lost a lot of times by people, because you say whites are responsible for it, but if they feel like they're attacked, that they're guilty no matter what, it's kind of like, you're going to be my friend even though you're an idiot. Well, that person's not going to be my friend if I'm calling them, or I'm accusing them, or I'm blaming them, because at the household level, at the one person on the street thing, he may literally never even go through, like you said, he's not even realizing any of that whatsoever. And it's not even resonating in their mind. And when they get offended by it, what are they going to do? We see it in the news. We see it in social media. They shut down or they fire back really loud.
Because
the tendency.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you speak about racism to most whites, what you're doing is you're triggering their stress response.
Yeah.
This is why healing is so important. So you're triggering somebody's stress response, and it's fight, flight, or paralysis.
Right.
And so that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like, so you trigger someone's stress response. The thing to remember, so there's a lot, because this stuff is like, let's unpack a little bit of that.
Yeah.
So People of color. So let me back up. So when I'm talking about racism is a problem for people of color, not the problem of, right? In order for people of color to live in a racialized world, they have to live with consistent triggers. Remember what I said, fight, flight, or paralysis?
Mm-hmm.
Black people have to live with that, and brown people and indigenous people 24/7, 365. So one of the things that happens is that, and somebody wrote a book called White Fragility, because this group of people has to live with this insistent amount of stress, which causes stress-related illnesses. Therefore, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of those are stress-related illnesses. Okay. And so they're living in a world that causes them constant and continual stress and trauma. And so we have that group of people. And then we have a group of people that gets triggered when they get called a name. Okay. And interestingly enough, both people are suffering because the fact that you get triggered about something means that something's off. What is it? Resma Menakem, who is the author of My Grandmother's Hands, puts it really well. He says, if it's hysterical, it's historical. If you're overreacting about something, some person, some place, something, then you have a trigger that just, by the mere mention gets triggered. So you have people that by the mere mention of a word get triggered. And we have people who are triggered 24/7, 365 by living, by being in somebody's belly before you're even born, by even at your burial. There are cemeteries still in this country that are segregated. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So what are we talking about here? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're talking about triggers versus constant and continual stress. Now, how do we get people to show up? And I got to tell you that about 80% of my audience are white people.
Oh, that's
and they
great.
keep coming back.
That's
and
great.
The reason they keep coming back is because one of the things that I remind people is this is not your fault. If you just get that this is not your fault, but it is still our collective responsibility as a human body to heal it, because everybody absorbed that caste system in a different form based on where they fall in the caste system. So some people absorb that caste system as supremacy. And when they say supremacy, I'm talking about the basic meaning of the word, which is to be superior over, to be superior from, to have more rights than others. And that's what I'm talking about. We're not talking about the people who go and destroy and burn crosses. That's one form of it. But the regular, everyday, average, nice person form of it is the expectation that you're going to be treated differently because. And so much so that you don't ever even think about it. You just expect it,
Right.
And then we have people who absorbed it as colonization. Colonization is the taking over of and expecting to be served by those who you took over. Some people internalize it as colonization and enslavement. But we all internalized the system. We just internalized it differently. So when people are talking about white racism, right? What they're really talking about, and this is the piece that no one explains to us, and it just drives me nuts. What they're really talking about, here is how you absorbed that caste system, where I would have absorbed it as Stockholm syndrome as a person of color. That's when you're kidnapped, okay? And you start to take on the characteristics of your kidnapper, okay? So also people of color absorbed it as constantly striving for, constantly striving for. So per capita, you have more, particularly Black people who are PhDs than you have whites, because you just can't get enough information to make yourself be believable, to make yourself be the one that should be getting the job, or should be, do you know what I mean? Like, it's just there's not enough of that, because one of the ways that the system impacts particularly people of color, so it impacts whites in a very similar way, but it's really visible in people of color. One of the impacts is that you're not enough. You're not light enough, dark enough, Black enough, white enough. You're not enough. You're just not enough.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what you do. You can never be enough because you'll never be white.
Right. No, that's definitely, especially, my son's biracial because my wife's from Venezuela, so she's Latina, and it's like you fall in the cracks of different things, and both sides have different expectations of how you that there's definitely truth in that. And I think it's hard for white people to understand, and having a wife who's Latina, she was born and raised in Venezuela. She would never be mistaken for a white in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget this. This happened when we were first married, and it really struck me. There was a grocery store back in the day where you used to have to write checks, actually physically handwrite checks.
Yes.
I'd go in the grocery store, write a check, and they'd never check my ID ever. Never. Every time she went in there, they would pull out ID, they double, triple check her, just subtle little things like that. And I think sometimes we as white people, we don't experience that piece like you had said, whereas if you're an African American, you have stuff happen that whites just don't necessarily appreciate. And so we don't value it as important. It's more like, well, suck it up and get over it. It's now 2021. Let's go forward. And I think if we can find common ground somewhere that, hey, there are things that happen, and some are just minor, but how annoying is that? I got more mad than she did, actually, when she first told me. I'm like, what do you mean they're checking your ID? And now I go in there it's like if we can get an appreciation of those things, I think is just absolutely vital. But those triggers are strong. If I say the word mask mandate, that will literally trigger everybody. If I say build a wall on the southern border, it's going to trigger pretty much everybody. And it's just, we live in this social media, instantaneous, everybody's opinion is out there on the spot, wild, and not having a conversation like you and I can sit and talk, and I can see we don't agree on everything, but we can still agree on some baseline stuff, and we can come together hopefully to move the whole big picture, at least talk about it, so people can open-mindedly see how to have a discussion on these topics. And I think, again, that biggest thing, so the system, the caste system as you describe it. So if it exists like it does today, and it's been basically in place, let's just give it the 1400s. But, you go back to Rome and the Greeks, and you can find all kinds of different people that were discriminated at different times. The Athenians hated
We're very good at doing that.
Yeah. But let's just stay like in this current system. What would it take, do you think, to literally end this systemic caste system? I mean, and as a humanities professor as I am, and I look at the whole of human history, I don't want to be pessimistic, but it seems almost an impossibility to get rid of racism, because I'm not sure I could ever find a society that you could say, ooh, there it is. They didn't have any racists anywhere. And if it wasn't skin color, it's obviously economic status, it's social. I mean, you can.
Yeah, it's all the isms. All the isms. Yeah. So one of the ways that, and I'm going to call it segregation, segregating the human race into different, one of the easiest ways to do that is you take away people's history, you take away their language, You tell them that what they believe in terms of their spirituality is wrong and bad. And then you drill them continuously on that. Then you use violence to traumatize them. And traumatized people traumatize other. And we now know through epigenetics that trauma gets passed on from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is send a couple of people from their family to war and have them come back. Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. What we have been doing continually since before the times of the Romans is traumatizing people through violence.
Right.
And the reason that we do that is because traumatized people are destabilized, and destabilized people are easy to control. And so you want to make sure that they don't know their history, that they're doubtful about their own belief system. So they're no longer listening to their core, and they're no longer listening to their own intuition. They're listening to outside sources that give them the information they think those people should have in order that those people may be controlled. So how do we heal it? By not doing that. What is it that Einstein said? You can't solve your problems with the same consciousness that created it. That's the consciousness that created racism. That's the consciousness that creates economic violence. That's the consciousness that creates wars. That's that same, we cannot solve it with that consciousness. So then we have to reach out to, what is a different consciousness from that? About love, about compassion, about understanding, about telling people the truth instead of hiding their history from them. Because decontextualized trauma, people still act out of the trauma. They don't know what it is. Knowing what the trauma is helps. Pretty much everyone that's come to this country since, I would say, before the 1950s, came because they were being traumatized where they were. And right. I don't care if you were a pilgrim, I don't care who you were.
Yeah.
You came to this part of the world because where you were was horrific.
Oh, the Irish in New York were completely brutalized for so long.
Yeah. And what did they do? They came and they brutalized Black people because traumatized people traumatize others. So what we need to do is we need to become conscious of the ways that people are traumatizing each other. We need to educate people to something different. We need to inform them that every time they traumatize someone else, because see, it's very easy to see how people of color are traumatized by a very violent system, okay? Whites don't see their own trauma because it's hidden behind privilege. And so one of the things that happens with whites is that they remain silent and invisible when it comes to racism because their privilege hides how they are actually oppressed by the same system. And one of the ways that people are oppressed, white people are oppressed, is because laws were set up a long time ago that told you who you would marry, who would be educated, who would actually have healthcare. This stuff was written by the Spaniards a long time ago. And that system that we're under determined who will get educated, like women weren't allowed to read and write. You could be burned if you got caught with a book at one point, right? And so, so we need to understand that this is collective human history. There is no such thing as Black history and European history. All of our history are inextricably linked. This is our human family history. And when we start to break that down, we start to understand who got traumatized when, by whom, you begin to understand, and you understand that traumatized people traumatize others, and that trauma gets passed on, and you understand that you cannot traumatize another human being without you yourself being compromised and compromising your progeny, then maybe people will stop traumatizing other people. Yeah. But they need to be educated about that, right? So we need an educational system that's more comprehensive.
What would you say to the white college student I have who first generation, there's over 10 million whites who are in poverty right now. Mm-hmm. And they would probably say, if I could get me some of that white privilege, would you please hand me some of that white privilege?
Yeah, because they don't understand white privilege. That's right.
That's worse than many. So how do you, when you hear, and I think this gives some people pause too, when they hear the blanket of white privilege, there are definitely people privileged there. I mean, to pretend otherwise would be silly, right? I mean, that's an obvious statement there. But what do you say about the white who is is way at the bottom? And there's a bunch. I've been a foster parent for years, and oh my god, I've had white, black, Hispanic, but I don't see much of a difference in any of them down at that level. So again, the language that we use to is so important to get whites to understand and appreciate so much of your perspective, because when they hear the word white privilege, many people would say, huh, you don't know my life. I had no privilege. You want to know what privilege I've had? Let me sit down and I'll tell you in an hour and a
Yeah,
half.
absolutely. Because white privilege means absolutely the word privilege. If you're just going to use the word privilege, that's a completely different thing from white privilege. Mm-hmm. Let me explain the difference. Okay. Regular privilege is something that people look at from the perspective of socioeconomics. Okay. White privilege is not just socioeconomics, right? Because it can include that. But really what white privilege is the things that can happen to you and for you simply because you have white skin.
That's such an important distinction.
That's the difference.
Critical for everyone listening to understand that.
Yeah. So for instance,
because when they hear that white privilege, immediately, even if they're at the bottom,
they go to finances. That's where they go.
Oh, really? You're telling me I have white privilege? And they're associating their economics with that situation. And again, words are so powerful.
Absolutely.
And they have so much meaning. And it's important that people who are listening to this understand that distinction, because
so let's say both you and your wife were completely poor. Okay, you were just surviving, and that checkbook that you have is a joint checkbook, or it's two different. It has two different names on it, right? Mm-hmm. There's her name on her checkbook. There's your name on the checks, right? And you just gave a perfect example. You both go shopping to the same store. All they should care about is their money in that account.
Right.
But they care about so much more with her than they do with you. The assumption is that she doesn't have, that the money's not going to be there, that she has bounced checks before, that there's something wrong with her because she's not enough. You, however, as a white male can show up, and just your presence means you're enough. They just assume that you're going to have money. Okay, so now let me explain to you about someone, a white person who's very, very poor, okay, going out to, let's say you're both going to go to the bank to get a loan or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So Black person goes in, nice suit, well dressed, they're nice professional appearance, and they show up to the bank and they get drilled, okay, about how they're going to pay for this loan, what they have, blah, 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 like the usual stuff, and then some. Okay, now, white person who is also poor goes to the local Goodwill, and they buy a suit for 25 cents and a pair of shoes for 20 cents, and they groom themselves, and they show up to the bank also for a loan. Financially, they ain't got nothing, okay, to cover this loan with. But the chances are pretty good that white person's going to get that loan. That Black person's going to walk out of there without a loan. And I mean, I could tell you stories about when I was buying my first house. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I had one friend who I had finally been turned down by the third bank. Yeah, and a friend of mine had called, and he was my professor at the time. We were very good friends, and he said, "So how's it going with the house?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to get it. I just got turned down by the third loan." He goes, "You're kidding me." I said, "No." He goes, "Do you want me to call them for you?" I said, "What can you do?" Because back then I'm totally naive. I don't know what I'm really dealing with, right? And he goes, "Oh, you don't know this about me. I used to be the vice president of Chase Manhattan. I'll call them for you." Within 2 hours, they faxed me the information, and I didn't have to wait 6 weeks for my loan. I got it in 2 weeks. Because someone with privilege spoke up for me. So that's the difference, right? The difference is in the ways that you get treated and the assumptions that are made. Like when that poor person went in there with a nice suit, maybe even the same suit, they were seen as somebody who can rise above, right? Or who will have the money. And even if they don't have it now, they can probably get a job because they're more likely, they're less likely to get denied to get the job to pay back the loan than a Black person. I mean, the saying is to be last hired, first fired. So there's a knowledge by that bank system that a white person is going to have more financial security if once they start to rise through the ranks, right? And that they can, because all they have to do is change their appearance and show up. And what the research is telling us is that a white male with a high school diploma and a record and a federal offense record has a better chance of getting a job than a Black male with a college degree and no record. That's the difference between white privilege and not having white privilege. And if you look at all of the people that have come to this country, for the most part, when they first arrived here, they were not considered white. The Irish were not considered white. The Jews were not considered white. You know, people had to do certain things to fit in. Some Jews changed their names. Some, the Irish people had to lose their accent. And so by the second generation, they could be considered white if they did certain things to fit in. The Italians, you'll find that in a lot of Italian families, the second and third generation don't speak Italian anymore because they gave up the language in order to be white. Because whiteness is something that can give you privileges that if you're not white, you cannot get. So even people with white skin that arrived to this country, when they first started arriving to this country in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were not considered white. There were something like 48 different classifications of race that did not apply to Black or brown people. That was white Europeans, Eastern Europeans, and so on and so forth. So, you know, so again, it's this knowing of this history and understanding it and being able to unpack it that helps us to get a greater grip. So when we're talking white privilege, what we're talking about is the difference between you going into that little store with your checking account and not get asked questions or you know have to show your ID versus your wife who does. That's the difference. So it's a white skin thing and what you can get because of that skin color.
Yeah. You know, on the banking issue, I think so much of I mean, I don't want to go down a banking thing, but I mean, the whole world revolves around your credit score anymore. So, I mean, if you don't have a credit score, you ain't getting a loan, period. I don't know how much that's color of skin anymore, but maybe back I think there probably was a period where they actually sat people. I don't know if I ever remember going in a bank. I always remember filling them online by the time I could buy a house, but
I went in person.
Yeah, you did it.
And I got denied.
Yeah, you had to walk physically.
I walked it. Because some people some people don't have to walk it. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the other difference too. No, I walked it. And so that's why I can tell you these things. And I also have a lot of friends who walked it. Yeah. And so it isn't a one-off. It isn't just like, well, that happened to me. It's like, no.
Yeah. Having been a foster parent and dealing with a lot of these very low socioeconomic white people, I'm not so sure. Most of them, again, with criminal records, many of them with serious drug problems. That's why we would have their kids in our house in the first place. It didn't matter how white they were. They weren't getting a job because they had they had a lot of other issues many times that were preventing them from, race might have helped them a little, but not enough to get out of where they were almost all the time. Every once in a while you hear that we'd have these wonderful success stories, but they were more few and far between. But
so that's why Dr. King was trying to start the Poor People's Campaign, because his whole thing was that it doesn't matter if you're poor.
Yeah.
If you're poor, you're poor. Whether you're poor and you're Black, you're poor Latino, you're poor white, it doesn't matter. You're all poor. But here's the thing. When Dr. King tried to start that campaign, he couldn't get that campaign. He couldn't get white people to join that campaign because they were white.
Right.
And that was, despite their poverty, that was their claim to fame. It's like, well, at least we're not black like those people over there, or brown like those people over there. You see so that's the privilege piece.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So, Milagros, as we get close to ending here, I want to give you a chance. Well, I have two final questions. I mean, do you see a solution that actually can get fixed above just the person, like how you deal with your 2-day seminar? You bring people in, you educate them, they become more fluent in the conversation, they understand the history, they're willing to listen to both sides, they're willing to participate, whether they're black, brown, white, Hispanic. I mean, I don't mean to not have faith in our government at all, but governments have always oppressed everybody all the time. There has never been one that doesn't oppress. If they can keep power by race, they'll keep it by race. If they can keep it by socioeconomic, they'll keep it by, if they need war, they'll use war. They'll use
absolutely
whatever tool they need. I mean, are we almost having a conversation as far as holistically worldwide is almost just, we're having a nice theoretical talk, and the real battle is just you and me and everybody else get better. And as we each get a little better, we each make the lives of the community better. I mean, where do you think this all, how do we get that healing you talk about?
Yeah. So healing is an individual journey, because healing is an individual choice. You cannot force people to heal. Right. If someone has a drug problem, you can't, you can send them to rehab, but until they are ready, they won't start that healing process. They'll keep going down. And so we can't force people, but we can continue to do the work within ourselves, within our families, and within our communities to make a real difference. And I'm going to tell you just a quick story about how here's one of the hopes is that as people gain their strength and their wholeness, they'll stop turning their power over to other people, because that is part of the problem. Right. Okay. But I want to tell you this quick story, because I worked on a project called Congressional Conversations on Race, and it was a 3-year program that with a grant that was made by the Kellogg Foundation to work with 8 members of Congress, and they would then invite other members to join them as we did programs. And we had just finished doing a program, and this particular congressman from Alabama, who's a Republican from Alabama, stood up and he said, I had no idea how some of the laws that we had made were hurting African-American families. And I want to do something to change that. And I want you, and you. And he pointed to several members who were there from his side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle to join him, because he was going to form a committee. Right there and then he made that decision to form that committee. And this was in 2012 of 2013. And 2 years later, I was meeting the new CEO of one of the organizations that had brought me on to work with the members. And she was new, and I was telling her about my work, and she said, why have you done this work for so long? So it seems to me like you've been doing this work before it was like popular, right? And I said, yeah, I have. And she said, why do you keep doing it? I said, because I get to see people transform right before my very eyes. And then I told her that story about that Republican. She goes, oh my God, I was chief of staff for so-and-so, and he was on that committee. And they're looking to turn some of that stuff into law. We never know whose heart we're going to impact. See, everybody's trying to solve racism from their heads. Who's white, who's black, who's got privilege, who doesn't. Like, everybody's trying to solve it up here. If we could solve it in our heads, we would have a long time ago. We have a lot of research material. We have a lot of numbers. We have a lot of that stuff. But until people can allow all of that information that's in their heads to take that 12-inch drop into their hearts, nothing changes. Right. That day, that man's heart was touched. And when people's hearts are touched, you don't have to make them. You don't have to force them. They do the right thing. Because human beings are wired for love. Right. We are wired for love. And so when people understand that we are all in this together, that we are one human family living on one global village that we know as the earth, we start to look at life differently. And we realize, wow, my cousins over there, they don't have any shoes. What can we do about that? Oh, the cousins over there, they don't have any books. What can we do about that? And when we start looking at each other as one human family that has been suffering from not receiving the gifts that all human beings bring to this earth, because everybody's born with gifts that they can offer the world. And when we block them from doing that, we impoverish ourselves and the world we live in. If we open our hearts and we start to open our doors to our organizations and to our political systems and to all of these places where we can make change and impact change, and we bring love and make that the foundation of everything we do as we look at each other as one human family, I really believe that we can leave less and less and less to each coming generation. And if we do that, there will be a day when people will read about us in the history book as, what was racism? What is that? Rather than where we are now. If we do nothing, it's never going to change.
Right. That's almost a drop the mic moment right there, Milagros. That was a beautiful one. I think, each of us all the time, like I tell my students in class, you got to think and you have to have humility to listen to other people, and you have to have an open mind just to hear it. You don't always have to agree with everything, but goodness, if you'll just talk with somebody, you can gain perspective. And if you gain perspective, you can gain new bits of knowledge. And as you gain new bits of knowledge, maybe down the road, it'll create some cognitive dissonance. And you're like, hey, maybe I can change this way or that way, or I can view this instead of this antagonism of, oh, you want to talk about that? I'm not even going to listen. The worst thing that's happening in society on this topic, nobody will even listen to the other side. Yeah. They will name call, and I'm not even going to hear it. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to listen. And that is, to a free democracy, that is suicide. Yeah. That is suicide when we won't listen to each other. Yeah. We literally will consume ourselves from within if we're not careful with that. So once again, Milagros, it's been a pleasure. I mean, I know we don't agree on everything, but we agree on a lot of stuff. And I so thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to come on my show today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm glad that we can at least meet common ground.
Absolutely. And Milagros, if somebody wants to connect with you or maybe buy a book, or where should they go? Do you have a website, or how should they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So my website is www.milagrosphillips.com. So it's just my name with .com. And there's a whole thing in there with testimonials, and my books are all listed there as well. So people can click on that, and they can also find my first 3 books are already on Amazon, and probably by the time this podcast comes out, the 4th book will be out there as well.
Excellent. And everybody listening to in the I'll put her link down below. So if you just want to click it and go check out what Milagros is up to right now, you can feel free to do that. So once again, thank you, Milagros.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for listening to the podcast today. I so hope you found value in the topic today. Every single day, if we can expand our perspective just a little bit on any range of topic, whether it be about our physical body, intellectual sharpness and perspective, or spiritual growth, then if we stay consistent in the long run, we all become more well-rounded people able to cope with all manner of events in life. I always appreciate you clicking like or follow to this podcast. Generally, a new episode is published every single week. And please, if you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear about them. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week until we talk again.